Welcome back to Misguided the Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Bacciani, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Kate Bierberdorf. Dr. Bierberdorf is also known as Kate the Chemist and is a nationally recognized science communicator, chemistry professor, and best-selling author. Dr. Bierberdorf has spent years making science exciting and accessible through live demonstrations, television appearances, and books for both kids and adults. Now she's bringing that expertise to the University of Notre Dame as their first professor for the Public Understanding of Science, a role designed to bridge the gap between scientific research and the general public. I remember seeing the announcement for this new position and thinking how important and exciting it was for a university to directly value science communication in the form of a professorship. Today, we'll talk about her journey into science, why she's passionate about science outreach, and how she engages audiences in a world filled with misinformation. Then we'll also talk about why universities need to take public science engagement more seriously. Let's get into it. I remember seeing Notre Dame announce this new professor for the Public Understanding of Science role, and I remember thinking how that was such a cool and important position. And I'd love to first just hear about your journey into science and science communication, as well as what inspired you to be more public with your science outreach. And then finally, how does this all tie into your current role at Notre Dame?
Sure. They offered me a job that has 2 prepositions in it. And I immediately was like, okay, let's look into that title. What could that mean? But the journey to Notre Dame has been kind of interesting. So I'm originally from Kalamazoo, Michigan. I went to University of Michigan to get a degree in chemistry and German. I studied abroad for short minute just to learn more about German, but please don't speak to me in it if you know the language because I can't remember it at all. After that, I moved down to University of Texas where I got a PhD in inorganic chemistry. So I spent about 5.5 years studying the Suzuki-Mirror cross-coupling reaction. Don't expect you to know what that is. But basically, it is a process where I would build a catalyst, so one molecule that was really good at bringing 2 other molecules together. And this process is used in a lot of pharmaceutical drug synthesis, and so I was able to kind of move the needle a little bit on that. That being said, I learned pretty quickly in grad school that I don't love the lab. That's not where I shine. I am a performer at heart. I like teaching. I like students. I like talking to students about chemistry. And so through my path in grad school, I learned quite quickly that I wanted to be a professor and just teach, like a teaching professor. And so after I graduated, the position opened up and I was able to teach at University of Texas for 10 years. So I taught general chemistry for 10 years. I had 2 classes, so about 1,000 students total. And so for 10 years, I just performed and tried to get students to fall in love with chemistry, or at the very least, like it a little bit more than when they first walked into my classroom. I understand how these classes go. I took physics classes. They were not for me. I got through them, but I just didn't jive with the material. So I get it. I get if students don't love chemistry, but hopefully they liked it more after being in my class. But while I was at Texas, I was able to kind of create this character, Kate the Chemist. It started quite quickly at UT. I was offered a opportunity to go on We Are Austin, which is like a local science channel, variety show, I should say. It comes on after the morning news. And I went there, did a science demo. It went well. They invited me back for Halloween, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas. And before I knew it, I had a monthly segment with them. And so for 4 years, every single month, I would go on local news and try to get people to fall in love with science. Through that, I started working with Amy Poehler through Amy Poehler's Smart Girls. She gave me some really good feedback on how to communicate science because she has the media world, all of that. And then in 2018, I'm getting to the good part. So in 2018, Bill Nye upset some people. So he went to the White House Correspondents' Dinner with an avid climate change denier. And people got so mad at him, which I thought was unfair because how are you ever going to change someone's opinions if you don't sit down and talk to them with it? But whatever. So through that process, a man reached out to me. He lives in LA, but he's from New York, so he has quite the accent. And he was like, I think you're the next Bill Nye. Come out here. Let's try it. And I was like, you're nuts. That's wild, but let's go for it. And so I flew out there, rebranded as Kate the Chemist. And so since 2018, I have been hustling like crazy to try to get people to fall in love with chemistry and science in a more general way. And so through that, I have a bunch of books. I have 7 children's books. I have one for adults. It's about chemistry and the craziest day of your life and how you can talk about, all the science in the busiest day ever. I host a podcast for NPR called Seeking a Scientist. So I get to interview amazing scientists like yourself. It's odd being on this side of the interview. But I love the podcast because I get to talk to scientists in all different fields and ask them questions and things I've always wanted to talk to them about. So I really enjoy that. But honestly, like the reason people know me and the reason why I get asked to do these fun events is because I blow stuff up on TV. So I have been working with the Today Show. I've done Colbert, Rachel Ray, Nick Cannon, Wendy Williams, The Talk, NBC Nightly News, Neil deGrasse Tyson, you name it, I've probably been there. And I get to go on these shows, live television, and for 3 to 7 minutes, it depends on how much time they have. I'm usually at the end of the show, so it gets crunched down if people are really chatty in the earlier spots. But I get to go and do a science experiment. And sometimes they'll let me do 2 or 3, and I have 3 to 7 minutes to talk about why I love chemistry and try to show people that scientists are just normal people. We are humans who like to ask questions, and then we, with everything in our being, we search for an answer. And so that's kind of what I've been doing as Kate the Chemist, and all that brought me to December 2023 when I did the Christmas lecture here at Notre Dame. And I thought it went well. I'm going to be honest. I thought the presentation went well. I was so happy with it. And that evening, I got an email from the dean. His person basically was like, hey, I want to meet with you the next morning. And so I thought I was in trouble. I thought I was going to get yelled at by a dean at a university I didn't work at. And he offered me this job. So long answer to get to here. And so this job is the professor for the public understanding of science. It is based off of a role in Oxford that was created in 1995 for Charles Dawkins, who is a very famous scientist, very well respected. And he was extraordinarily good at talking to people about science without being emotionally charged. So as an evolutionary biologist, that's a very important skill to have. And so this role was created for him in 1995. So we're 30 years behind Oxford. They are crushing it in Europe with this role. And I am just trying to chase after them and see what we can do. So at Notre Dame, what we're doing is we're building a science communication minor, which is really exciting. I am working with everybody who's already crushing it here in South Bend, doing amazing public outreach. And I'm just trying to, build a network here. I had a huge network in Texas, and right now I'm trying to figure out who the key players are, bring them in, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it.
Wow, that's awesome. That's such an amazing journey. And it's so cool to hear universities now taking a more serious approach to science outreach and science communication. I feel like just more broadly, institutions are really slow to adapt to social media and outreach and are finally getting like, oh, this is actually important and we should have been paying attention to this. Like you said, 30 years behind other countries in a lot of ways. So it's really great to see Notre Dame embrace this. And I hope that other universities in the United States will continue to do this.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you heard about any other positions like this? Do you think this is growing?
Well, in Cambridge, they just announced a professor for the public understanding of mathematics. So Hannah Fry was just appointed to that. So there is some movement there, which is kind of neat. And it's another woman appointed. So I'm super happy that we're representing STEM. But to go back to kind of what you were just saying, for scientists, we have 3 jobs. We ask the question, we do the research, and then we talk about what our results were, right? Like that's the 3 things we were supposed to do. And during grad school, we're trained really, if you go to a good school, you're trained how to report and talk about your science in the written form. You learn how to write about that science and talk about it to your peers and to other people who know that language. They have that vocabulary. But what I at least did not get, and I know a lot of my colleagues, my peers also did not get, was the science communication in an informal setting to the non-scientist. And so what I hope changes with my role is that we start giving graduate students and undergraduate students just more training on how to talk about the science. Use social media, use outreach, and just get out of the jargon jungle, which I heard for the first time yesterday. I'd never heard that phrase before, and I love that. And so we just get so hung up on our jargon, and it's hard for us to communicate. But we have 3 jobs. It is part of our job to talk about our science, but we just need to build the skill of talking to non-scientists.
Yeah, no, I love that term too. You're the first person that has told that to me. So I'll have to, that's jargon jungle. I often think about that because there's so many amazing scientists who one, like a lot of them don't even go on social media. And then there's a few of them who do, who barely use it and will just like copy and paste their abstract to some cool paper they wrote. But then like no one will read it, right? Because it's just all this jargon in this little like dense paragraph.
Right.
And it's just like a little bit of formal training, I think would go a long way with so many scientists and academics.
Absolutely. It's a skill. It is a skill, just like a muscle. Like if you're training for a marathon, you have to build this skill. You're not going to be an amazing science communicator overnight. And if you are, then please get out there. We need you. We need your help right now. Just talking about science, scientists lost the trust of the public somehow. And so right now, I think it's really important for as many of us as possible to get out there, humanize ourselves, talk about our research, show what we're doing. Just we're your neighbor, right? We're just here trying to make the world a better place. And I think if we build our oral communication skills and lean into social media and find a way to talk about science in 40 seconds. So an average TikTok video is 40 seconds. So to figure out how to explain this way complicated science in 40 seconds without the jargon, without it being boring, that's a skill. That is an absolute skill you need to work on. That is not something that just happens overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have been trying to do this for years now, and I feel like I'm always learning, always getting better at it. And, trying to learn from people like yourself and other experts in science communication to see how they do it and just create this collective of knowledge and science communicators. It's great that now we have so many scientists and science communicators out in the public sphere because, 20, 30 years ago, when there was just television, there wasn't social media, there's more barriers. There was Bill Nye was like the science guy, right? And then there wasn't a lot of other Bill Nyes. There wasn't a lot of diversity among science communicators and scientists. And, that speaks a lot to the effects of how that could impact representation and how different folks might think that they, if science is for them or not too. So there's a lot of important aspects to having a diverse science communication base.
Oh, completely. I mean, and at a certain point, it's a branding thing, right? I mean, if you think about scientists, I don't want to guess your age, but it's possible that we were exposed to the same type of scientists growing up. And that was usually a white guy, a passionate white guy with a white lab coat. And so what I am trying to do is just show a different version of a scientist. My only diva flair that I do is I refuse to wear a white lab coat. I won't do it. You will never see me in a white lab coat unless something wild is going on and I just finally had to fold. But I just want to break the mold. Just show a different version. I'm not super feminine in the real world. I'm just not. But in the science world, I am very feminine, right? I lean into the makeup and the hair and it's just a different version of a scientist. So I just want to show young girls out there, if you're like me and you like to play soccer, go kickboxing, go rollerblading, and also like hair and makeup and jewelry, you can also be a scientist. It just means, if you're a scientist, it just means you're passionate about something, you have questions, and you want to find the answers. And so I just think if we can just rebrand a little bit and show that, we're actually really cool. Like, I just met you and you're really neat. I would love to talk to you for hours. I can already tell you're super passionate about things. And that's just what we see with all these scientists. And unfortunately, some of us are introverts. And so it's a little harder for others. My husband's a massive introvert. But getting people out of their shell and talking about their research really is going to help our field a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, like as we mentioned before, slowly institutions are getting this. And it's just a matter of having them see the incentives too. Unfortunately, it seems like now that we have this crisis of trust and all these issues with misinformation and distrust in science and medicine, now institutions are like, we should do something about this. So it would have been nice if there was more proactive or just listening to people who are speaking about these potential issues ahead of time, but didn't quite get there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, but we're working towards it.
We're working towards it, right? We're in this spot. And so I think if you and I and all of our other science communicator friends just keep doing what we're doing, right? Put our head down, just do our science, do our research, try not to get super involved in the politics, we can still move the needle. We can still do what we're here on Earth to do. And that's to make it a better place. We're trying to cure cancer, right? I mean, that is amazing. We're doing amazing things.
Yeah, absolutely. So we mentioned social media a little bit, and I wanted to ask you more about that because you have such a great Instagram and you do really really cool videos. And some of that, is with your chemistry experiments and all those explosions and stuff. But you do such a great job of just engaging with people in video format. So I just want to ask you more broadly about how do you see social media's role in science communication?
So important. And I was going to say between you and me, but we're recording for a podcast. But I struggle with social media. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I think it can be toxic because some of the comments that people make can be really dark and can be hard. And so I think when I encourage other scientists to step into that world, the first thing I need to say is you've got to have a thick skin and be ready for some negativity, but it's worth it. It is worth it. And so what I try to do with the videos is think about what I would want to see for another field, right? So I don't particularly love physics. I like to pick on physics because they're like our cousin. But I try to think about what videos I'd want to watch for physics. And they're short, they're to the point, and there's something visual. And so when I do a video, usually it starts off as like 10 minutes long script. Like it's just way too long. And then I have to finally cut it down to about 40 seconds. And when you do that, you can slowly figure out what is the most important part. And so I'm reading this book that Alan Alda wrote. And one of the things that he mentioned is that to be a good science communicator, you just need to give people just enough to get them to be interested so that they want to hear more. And so that's kind of been my approach lately, is just dangle a little bit of information and then maybe try to follow it up with something else. Just this morning, I posted about hand warmers because it is frickin' freezing here in Indiana. I don't know how. I feel like we've got like 8 inches of snow today. It's just wild. Yeah. And so, I'm using my hand warmers. And so I thought, I'll just take a quick picture of this and then I'll write about what they do and just very quickly, blah, 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 blah. And so that was just a quick one. But it was in the moment. It was relevant. And I think I might be able to catch people's attention and teach them one sentence of science, just one little thing. If they learn that they're possibly converting iron into rust, boom, done. Okay, I'll take it. And then maybe they'll go on and read something else about it. So that is my approach. If you want to talk about misinformation, this might be a whole nother pod, but that is like the number one thing that gets under my skin. If you want to see me angry, show me an inaccurate science video. And I'm not talking about some like random science communicator who maybe misspeaks or says something wrong here. They're like an accidental misspeak. It's the science communicators who are intentionally misleading. That drives me bonkers. It's so unfair. All we have as scientists is our word. And so when somebody breaks that trust, it affects all of us. And so that really eats me up. I have a hard time with it.
Yeah, me too. I think about that a lot. And again, I think about the incentive structures and how there's almost an asymmetry, or there is an asymmetry. Like it's easier to lie and make stuff up, right? Like it's harder to actually do the work and cite your sources, provide all the nuance. So it's kind of an unfair battle. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how to best combat that. Like how do we stay accurate and interesting and compete in this landscape where there is kind of an unfairness for evidence-based science?
It's tough. And I think for each person, if you're creating your brand, your social media, your audience, whatever it is you want to call it, you need to decide where you want to land on that. And so I am personally trying to take a step forward on it because I've had it. And so I am practicing videos. I haven't posted anything yet, but I'm practicing things. And so I want to figure out how I can take a video that is wrong, or maybe I could add something to it, and figure out how I can correct the science in a polite way without shaming the person who did it, without being negative. And that's a really hard balance. And so for my character, Kate the Chemist, using quotes here, the character is loud and bubbly and happy. So for me to be angry about science, that doesn't work. It doesn't land. It's not part of the brand. And so I'm trying to figure out how to be a happy, bubbly scientist, but also correct science without offending any other science communicators. Because at the end of the day, I don't want a science communicator to stop because they made a mistake. I don't want that to happen, right? And so I think this question that you're asking is really loaded, and I love it, by the way. But it's just it's really hard. It's really hard to answer, and I think every scientist is going to have a different answer. I could do a better job of it, and that is something I'm going to try to be doing in the future here. I'm going to detour real quick, but I have at Notre Dame, they're building me a STEM studio. So it's a chemistry wet lab. There's a fume hood. I can do all my explosions in there safely. I can store my acids, everything's safe.
Cool.
But it's also a studio. So there's a truss there. So it's a big cage that will have all my lights, my cameras, my microphones. We're about like 6 weeks away from my opening. So it's right there. But that's one of the things I'm going to be targeting first. Like when that studio opens, those are the videos that we're going to be filming. We're going to be having conversations and talking about accurate stuff, how to be a good science communicator. But I'm also going to be going after some of this misinformation. But I don't know, wish me luck, because it's going to be a tough thing. And I don't want to do a bad job with it, because I think it's so important. If you have advice, I'd love to hear of what you think is the right way to do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds fascinating. I definitely would love to learn more about it and your approach and see what plans you have for it. I mean, I think about, misinformation all the time. And the best ways to debunk it. And, there's so many different ways to go about it. And there's science communicators that take a very aggressive approach and like really lean into hard debunks and almost like shame people for believing falsehoods. And then there's others that are more coalition-based, more kind of thinking about a broad audience. How do you build bridges and connect with people who might have just been led astray a bit? I fall on more on that camp. I try to reach people where they are and build bridges. So I think, again, it kind of speaks to the diversity of science communicators. Like sometimes we do need those people like are really strong and aggressive sometimes, even though I also wonder about some of the backfire effects that happen. And there's pros and cons with both approaches too. Like sometimes if you try to if you're too bridge buildy, then, maybe you can weaken some of your message in some context. So it's really complicated. And again, it speaks to that general point of just diversity of science communicators all doing their jobs.
And what's tough about what you're saying is that there's two audiences there. I mean, and more, but there's the general public or whoever is looking at your particular page. So if it's Instagram, it's your followers. If it's TikTok, it could be strangers. But there's also an audience of scientists. And so I think sometimes what happens is scientists are afraid of what their peers think about how they do something. And so they get so bogged down in the details and in the jargon, and they get so hung up on these things that they don't do a good job. And so I'm going to just say it. Forget about the jargon. Just forget about it. If you're going to try to do a good video, you've got to just forget about the scientists and don't worry about how they're going to react to it, because they will send you negative comments and say that wasn't good enough. And then my response usually is, great, how would you have done it? Like, tell me how you would have done it. And if they give me a better response, it's like, fantastic, thank you, let me do that. But usually they don't, because it's really hard to give a good explanation in 40 seconds. So I like your method about building the bridges, but I also want to just like put it out there. As a scientist, you've got to have thick skin and just remember who your audience is. Like, who are you talking to, and focus on that audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I've thought about too, is sometimes if you are speaking to just a scientist and your goal is to inform, it's important to think about what impact you're going to have. If you're trying to get people excited about science and they already are excited about science, well, I mean, that's great. That can keep them excited, and that's, a good thing. But if your goal is like, okay, I want to debunk things or correct things or get more people interested in science that are not as interested, then maybe that approach won't be as effective.
I'm hoping my age will help with that, because I'm about to be 40. I'm a year away. But I'm hoping that as I transition from like big demo explosion girl to more academic side, that will help with the debunking. But just like you said, like my character right now is loud and excited, and it's getting people excited about science. So the misinformation, the debunking is, I have to lean more into that academic side, the Dr. Kate Bieberdorf, the professor side, in order to do the misinformation and the debunking. And so I think it's tricky if you want to do both. Like it's not impossible. It's not I refuse to say that, but there is a way. But I think like what you just said, it's tough to do both.
It is tough, yeah. And I'll be curious to see that evolution as you approach this. I think you're thinking about it in a way that makes a lot of sense to me, and you're aware of these challenges. So I think that's really important. And it's just a matter of trying it out and seeing what works. And I mean, I'm excited to see your debunking misinformation series. I think that'll be really cool. I'm happy to talk with you more about it. Maybe we can work together on something like that too.
Yes, that would
Um,
be so
yeah,
fun. You have to come to
yeah,
the studio. You got to come
yeah.
so you can
No,
see it and check it out.
I need to visit Notre Dame. So I'll be coming hopefully when it's warmer and there's not 10 inches of snow. I could actually get there. Um,
Very true.
but yeah, so the other thing I wanted to ask you about, kind of connected to social media now, but more broadly about artificial intelligence and technologies. Where do you see science communication intersecting with artificial intelligence and this rise of AI everywhere?
So it's so interesting because I think depending on your age, you're going to have a vastly different answer to this. I talked to two scientists who are significantly older than me recently, and I swear all they wanted to talk to me about was ChatGPT. That's it. That's all they wanted to talk about, how amazing it was, how it's the answer to everything, how it's, this is, one of them was a Nobel Prize winner, by the way. I just want to put that out there. And so I left that conversation being like, okay, maybe I need to lean more into AI and ChatGPT. My husband is a software engineer. He's a coder. And so he really likes how AI can help with his job. But at the end of the day, all these scientists you talk to, you still have to have a human there at the very end looking at this information. What I love for as a science communicator is if I'm struggling to take let's say I'm talking at a collegiate level, whatever, to my college freshmen. If I'm struggling to take that sentence or an explanation down to an 8th grader, you can throw that into Chat GPT and say, lighten this up, help me out with it. And that is really helpful because then you can see how somebody else would say it and then put it in your own words. And it helps sometimes it pull you out of that jargon spot. So I think if you're trying to go from higher level to elementary or middle school, it can be your best friend. I really like it when I am doing research for my podcast for it to pull articles for me, and then I can sift through and see if I like these sources or not. So I think that is really helpful when you're trying to find information. But there's negatives. You got to be careful about what you put in there. I've worked recently with a group of graduate students who work on science policy, and I don't want to give too much information, but their projects were fed into ChatGPT without their approval. And so now all their research that is unpublished, all this stuff is now in AI. And they're uncomfortable with that. And I think that's very fair. So I think there's a consent piece that we need to be talking about here. And I want people to be cautious and just remember it's a tool. It can help you. It can help lighten the load. It can help make your life easier. But at the end of the day, it is not the answer to everything. You have to be able to use your brain and use your skills and use that information to develop your product, your final product, whatever that is. What's your thoughts, by the way? I'm so curious on what you think about this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's really interesting. And, some of it connects to what we were saying about the jargon jungle. Like, ChatGPT could be a really good way for people to at least get that first crack of removing, their dense abstract into something digestible. So if they're really, pressed for time or they don't feel like doing it, I feel like ChatGPT makes it pretty easy to at least give you a good start. And I've done that before. Like whenever I read an interesting article, it's written very densely. And I'm like, okay, how do I word this? Sometimes I'll put some paragraphs in ChatGPT and be like, summarize this in a simple way. And I think that's where it really excels is when you're starting, you give it the parameters ahead of time. It's still not great at just searching broadly and giving you good information. There's a lot of hallucinations, a lot of issues with that. But if you give it constraints and you say, within these paragraphs, summarize it and use different words. And, that's ultimately what the large language model is doing, right? It's taking language and doing all this complex statistical analysis and trying to find patterns that make sense. So I think leaning into the strengths of these AI chatbots makes a lot of sense to me. It could be really valuable. It's just being aware of the limitations is also important. And it's interesting, the different generations that use it, as you kind of alluded to as well. People, I think, around our age have seen the rise of social media and the rise of the internet, and we're just constantly seeing this next big thing. So it's kind of like we're aware of the limitations inherently because we remember what dial-up internet was like and MySpace was like, and before we had this algorithmic feed in our social media. So I'd be curious if you had a similar reaction. It's kind of with AI. It's like, okay, like I can see where this is going, but I also remember the limitations of every new big thing online.
Well, what I remember is my parents being like, be careful of online. Like, you can't trust a stranger danger, right? But they have all
Hmm.
these cautions for us. And now I feel like it's completely flipped. And now, as a millennial, proud millennial, I feel like it is my role to now talk to the older generation and be like, all
Hmm.
right, here are our limitations, here are our boundaries. And it's,
Right.
as a science communicator, again, we need to just communicate what's happening here. How does this work? If we can explain how it actually pulls the information and shows you whatever it is it shares with you, then I think that can just help in general. But people have to be open to it. They want to, they need to hear what you're saying. And so figuring out how to communicate with people and, like you said, build these bridges with people who might be on the other side of you is a huge skill. And so I
Hmm.
think if we can if we can do that and teach all generations the limitations of AI, I think that will really help, especially right now, because it's a budding field and it's going to be really interesting in the next 5, 7, 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to think about how this can quickly evolve. I mean, it already has. And ChatGPT, a few years ago, no one heard about it, and now it's just like a popular talking point among lots of different people, and it's going to be integrated in all our devices. And I think it's just very important to get in front of the limitations and the education ahead of time, so we're not trying to go after the fact, be like, uh-oh, like maybe be careful about this AI thing, get in front of it. And I think a lot of people are trying to do that. I try to do that. And I've been studying AI at Notre Dame. We study how people interact with chatbots and look at trustworthiness of chatbots. And that's kind of the direction my research is these days, is
Cool.
actually more AI focused. So it's cool to be on that side of it.
Well, when you're in town, you're going to have to come to the studio and we'll talk more about that, because I
Yeah.
think that would be really interesting to show it up. We'll have a huge monitor behind me. It's a 110-inch monitor in my studio, so we'll be able to pull it up. We can interact with it and kind of show what happens and talk through our thought process, because I think that's what's really important as science communicators, is to just show how we approach material, how we approach conversations. And what we were trained in grad
Hmm.
school to do is just poke holes and stuff, right? I mean, just that doesn't sound
Yeah.
right. That doesn't sound right. Poke holes and everything and just ask questions. And so if we can share the things we learned in grad school, those skills that we learned in grad school, with the general public, that's just going to make us a better society. And an informed
Yeah.
society votes better. We help each other out better. Like, our medicines improve. It's just a good thing.
Yeah, totally agree. The idea of promoting the method of science in a way that's digestible and accessible, I think, is always really critical, because so much is on the findings and the results and conclusions, and those are really cool too. But getting that method of scientific thinking and trying to present that in a way that's digestible and interesting is always a challenge that I think about too.
It's tough too. And I think if we had done a better job before 2020 about explaining how we get research, what we do when we get data, the whole process, and how we're just constantly adapting the model, fixing the model, trying to get the best model, I think that would have helped us communicate more about the vaccine and what's going on. But I have so many friends who reached out to me, understandably concerned about the vaccine and how it works and what the process is. And we just had a conversation. It's like, well, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what I'm looking for personally in order to
Hmm.
be comfortable with this. And just sharing that from a personal point of view, I think really helped cross. And I was living in Texas at the time, so I mean, a lot of Republicans, a lot of
Hmm.
red, and I'm pretty blue. So like, we were able to have these nice conversations with each other. If I just came from a point of like, I was scared too. Like, I've never been through a pandemic. I was really scared. So this is what I
Yeah.
did to make myself feel comfortable with the vaccine, and that seemed to work.
Yeah. I mean, I think about this a lot. I wrote a chapter of my book basically about this, just diving into how to communicate about science and health and vaccines and COVID. And basically, I
Nice.
spent a lot of time what went wrong with COVID-19. A lot of the communication, there was definitely a lot of issues with that. And one of the takeaways was just like, if we were more open about the process and the uncertainty, and share these stories about, why we have legitimate concerns about this, and then how we can derive at a conclusion that makes sense, instead of just being like, don't wear masks and wear masks, and then the
Right.
vaccine's going to totally prevent COVID. Actually, it might not. Like, those kind of very declarative statements that, I mean, this kind of gets into a broader discussion of that merge between policy and politics and science
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
always align all the time, because sometimes politicians want a very concrete, direct, certain answer, and science doesn't usually work like that. So that's an issue for sure.
Well, and that's another red flag too. I mean, when I hear a scientist with a declarative statement like that, that's a red flag for me. Like that
Right.
immediately goes off, because usually when we talk to each other, we are constantly putting in qualifiers like, well, if this happened and then
Right.
that happened, we might be able to do this. And so if I hear another scientist saying that was just like such finite authority or whatever, it's a red flag. And so I try to express that to my friends as well. It's like, this is what I see. This is what I'm hearing. And so now I'm a little bit concerned about whatever that person is saying.
Yeah, and there's research on this too. There's been a couple of papers diving into statements by scientists, and the ones that use more qualifiers and embrace that uncertainty more are more trustworthy to a public audience. So there's research backing up what you're saying. And I think
I love that.
It makes sense too. Yeah, like again, like if you're just thinking about someone who has this very declarative statement about this complex thing, I think most people would be like, that maybe there's some alternative explanation as to why they're so confident about this. So
for sure. Could you send me those resources, or can I connect with you afterwards about that? Because I'd love to read that. That's so fascinating.
For sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap up here, I guess I wanted to end on kind of another broad question about what advice you would give to educators and science communicators of the next generation. How can they best promote science communication in this evolving information landscape?
Well, I think to be a good scientist, you need to be a prolific reader. You need to be getting your hands on every piece of science you can, reading it, asking questions. If you want to be a science communicator, you need to practice. It's not something that's going to be perfect overnight. I've had so many scientists, professors come to me and say, I want to try social media. I'm so scared of it. And I'm like, girl, me too. Like, I was so intimidated by it.
Yeah.
I actually had the space gal, shout out to the space gal. She gave me some amazing, she's great. She gave me some amazing tips for how to first start with TikTok, because I was so intimidated by it. And she was like, you've got to have your face in it within the first couple seconds. Like, don't just do an experiment. You can't be boring. I mean, just amazing tips right off the bat. And she was just really incredibly helpful. But the one thing that I learned from all of that is just try it. Just try it. Don't be offensive. Don't be inaccurate. And just try a video. As long as you're trying and you're putting something out there, worst case scenario, people don't hit the like button. Like, whatever. It's not that big of a deal. So just keep trying it. You'll figure out what your quote unquote audience likes to hear from you, and study it. Be a scientist. Study what other scientists do. Figure out who has a personality similar to you, what works well for them, and then mimic that. But give credit. We're scientists. So if you use something like, oh, I was inspired by this, give them credit. And last thing is, like, if you're like me and you have tons of followers, we don't keep the videos up that don't perform well. And so just know that, like, not all of my videos has more than 5 million views on it. Those are my best ones. So I've had some that don't do very well. I leave them up for a little bit and then I take them down and then try again. Like, it's not a big deal. It's just social media. And as long as you're not offensive or rude and you really are trying to share what you're passionate about, it will land, but it's going to take a second. So just try. Yeah. That's my thing. Try it. Go for it.
That's great. I think that's a great point to end on, and an optimistic take on how we try to move forward. And thank you so much, Kate, for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me. This has been really, really lovely. And go Irish.
All right, go Irish. That's right.